Welcome to the Media Genius Podcast presents The Deep Dive, where we take a dive into a movie franchise. Join us now as me and Dan get into part one of the Alien franchise. All right, so everybody out there, hello and welcome. We're doing a Twitch stream to do the recording for what will be the YouTube and the podcast of this particular sub-show of the Media Genius Podcast. This is the Media Genius Podcast presents The Deep End. So in case this is your first Media Genius podcast, and it being the first episode of The Deep End, we should definitely tell you what we're all about. Media Genius, genius, groundbreaking entertainment narratives, indulging unique soapboxing. I really just wanted an acronym. Is about providing quality content related to and inspired by media, and shared through the lens of a group of friends who are ourselves creative, Dan being one of them. We've got writers, musicians, people in the film industry, people creating advertising and marketing content. Everybody's an avid consumer of media content and brings their experience and expertise to the table for all these discussions. The Deep Dive, this particular show, is all about taking a deep look into movie franchises and sometimes genre niches, which we love and sometimes don't. As a full disclaimer, hello, I'm Shawn, and I can basically find something redeeming about every movie, and likely will find a reason to recommend it. The Riddick movies are great, so is Barry Lyndon, so is Sharknado. They're all just different kinds of great. Anyway, I'm Shawn. We've said that a couple of times. And that's Dan. Am I pointing in the correct direction?
I think it's the other way. I think it's the other way.
Oh, and that's Dan. There we go. Let's tell you about ourselves, Dan.
Yeah.
Why don't you go first?
I will be contributing mostly to the Media Genius podcast brand, so to speak, in the form of The Deep End, which I'm really excited about. I got a host of other creative things going on. I am the lead guitarist in a metal band, Bring Out Your Dead. And I also stream on Twitch on this channel. So you can catch me playing different sorts of video games. Alien Isolation being one of them, which I think is a fun segue into the first episode here. I guess I met Shawn in high school. He was a first robotics mentor, and I was a mentee. Is that the right word, mentee?
Yes, it is.
Oh, great. So I was a mentee, and then we continued to have things in common and cool nerd things and became friends. And I guess the thing that qualifies me as a nerd is I'm deeply in love with Star Wars. And the thing that makes me as a bad nerd, I suppose, would be I like Star Wars too much.
Yeah, and for those of you out there going, you can't like Star Wars too much.
Yes, you can.
You haven't met someone who likes Star Wars too much. I put up with Dan's amount of liking Star Wars because I'm pretty close. Pretty close. So I'm Shawn. I'm the voice of the general Media Genius podcast. I'm a writer mostly, though Moonlighting with podcast does seem to let me share my experiences and opinions in a way that is interesting. My first book, The Cessation of Massachusetts, is available on Amazon, and it's somewhere there are links to that. That's fine. The Media Genius social media pages exist. We're on Facebook. They don't let us capitalize genius all the way because Facebook's awesome. There will be a Patreon at some point, likely in June. So not right now as you guys are watching this live, but when this actually comes to be. I don't know when you're listening to this because the internet is basically a time machine. So that's cool. To finish my plugs, though, The Cessation of Massachusetts is about some kids who start a garage grunge band and make it big. But it's really more about how a group of friends go through things, everything, and in the end still be something. My next book, Amber and Blue, which Dan is currently beta reading for me, is about not just a superhero, but the only superhero in that world. And that should be available by the end of the year. Dan, I saw your thumbs up, but it's doing okay so far?
It's fantastic. I love it so far.
So, without any further introductions needed, welcome to the Media Genius Podcast presents The Deep End, the Alien franchise. And if you don't want spoilers, it's time to get out of the pool.
All right.
So, we're just going to talk about the general Alien franchise first. The Alien franchise is one of the few film franchises which successfully spans multiple generations of Hollywood releases. From 1979 until right now in 2020, the Alien franchise has remained relevant and of a high or debatably high quality for more than 40 years. And it shows no real signs of slowing down. Some franchises have done the same, and we'll definitely be covering them, but often with a marked dip in quality, a change in tone, or an overall change in direction. Ridley Scott, the driving force behind the most recent renaissance of the Alien franchise, has managed to accomplish this with at least one of his other projects, and it might be his magic which brings that endeavor to successful fruition, um, spanning generations for Alien and Blade Runner. We won't talk too heavily about Blade Runner right now, but another time. From this franchise's early days, setting the standard for sci-fi suspense and horror, to the middle of its run, setting the standard for sci-fi adventure, and through its current run of what can only be described as philosophical sci-fi suspense, the Alien franchise has stayed true to itself. In space, no one can hear you scream, but you will scream. So we'll go right into Alien. Alien itself is set between 2120 and 2122.
Yeah. So I'm going to move us over here, and boom. So now we are looking at the poster for the first Alien movie. And if you haven't seen the movie but want a brief description, here it is. And if you don't want the brief description, here it is anyway. As the commercial space tug and relative POS Nostromo is returning to Earth, receives a strange transmission from LV-426. As directed by company policy, the crew, Captain Dallas, Warrant Officer Ripley, Navigator Lambert, Science Officer Ash, and the engineers Parker and Brett detour to investigate, finding nothing but gore and horror. Now needing to survive as prey of a perfect predator, they need to remember one thing: no one can hear you scream in space.
In talking about the movie, before we talk about the movie, Alien's a 1979 film directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon. Remembering Ridley Scott will be important later. On an estimated budget of $11 million, it pulled in almost $82 million US and $108 million worldwide, on its way to winning the Oscar for Best Visual Effects and being nominated for the Oscar for Best Art Direction. All of this was under the cloud of mixed reviews. If a critic was already open to the idea of a sci-fi film being a masterpiece, they loved it, while some critics less friendly to the genre did not. And even many of the positive reviews were mixed. Though, as we will discuss, this film has set some of the standards for excellence for later sci-fi and suspense-driven horror. At the time of its release, it was not hailed as revolutionary by any means. So now, let's talk about Alien.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start, Dan? What's the big thing for you? What's the big takeaway?
I think we could probably start with talking about its influence. The most recent example of hearing this movie, Alien, be an influence in another, I think, a masterful movie. John Krasinski has told people constantly that when he was preparing to do his script drafts and direct The Quiet Place, or A Quiet Place, he watched Alien a few times through, because he wanted to draw on the silence the movie instilled. He wanted to draw on the ambientness and the stillness and hit those beats in his movie, and I think he captured a lot of that from Alien directly. What do you think, Sean?
So for me, the big thing always comes down to, without Alien, we don't get The Abyss, we don't get Leviathan, we definitely don't get Event Horizon. There's a lot of stuff that we just don't get, and no one's going to say that Event Horizon is a fantastic classic movie, but if they didn't cut 40 minutes out of it, it probably would have been much better. But that said, it was entertaining, but it falls into that genre of science fiction suspense horror. And before this, there wasn't really any. There was some schlock, and then we probably still would have got John Carpenter's The Thing, but maybe we would have had sci-fi suspense monster movies. Maybe it would have been more like that and not necessarily isolation in space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was one of really the first movies that does that in a way that you would call suspense or horror. 2001: A Space Odyssey does the same thing, but with philosophy.
Hmm.
And we're going to call back to that later, almost certainly, because Kubrick is awesome. And there are later movies in the series that have a bit more of that going on. The other big thing that always comes to me about these movies is just music and ambient sound. Everything about the way this movie sounds is right. And you can't say that about every movie. The biggest one to me is another movie that sounds right, even though it's terrible, is the Spawn movie from the 90s. Everything about that movie sounds great. The movie itself is, I love it, but it's terrible. I admit that. But there are movies that don't sound right. 50 to 60% of the Transformers franchise, those movies don't sound right. And this really, as John Krasinski was probably pulling from, having a movie that sounds right is important.
I agree, definitely. I think another aspect of the sounding right is the sound design. So like on top of the ambient sound and the music that was composed and put into this movie, I think a lot of the like the clicking of the machines and like the sounds that like they're getting out of the computers and like the booting up of Mother, the onboard AI, like a lot of those sounds that they were unique and independent, and like you know, there are sci-fi sounds and sci-fi spaceship sounds already out there that everyone can recognize and people take those, but Alien, I feel like, stands out with those sounds in particular in a way that, like, if you were to pull them out, you wouldn't be like, that's a sci-fi noise or that's a spaceship noise. That you'd be like, that's the spaceship from Alien, or that's the little clicking noise you hear when the computer rolls its text across the screen.
A lot of those sounds get pulled out and used in a lot of cyberpunk. A lot of those sounds cross over to Blade Runner and also Johnny Mnemonic, as weird as that sounds. That said, Blade Runner, also Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
And Johnny Mnemonic, based upon a novel by William Gibson, who wrote the original screenplay for Alien 3, that was among the screenplays completely flushed. But we're talking about Alien right now. I digress.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll get to Alien 3. It can wait.
I'm so excited, you have no idea.
Oh god. When I think of who was one of the first strong female protagonists in sci-fi, and I think Ellen Ripley as a character, you know, like she I know that when the script was written, Ripley was initially going to be cast as a man. And then they made a change because Sigourney Weaver was so great. And also, I think a thing that helps push her character through this movie is the fact that there's an ensemble, a diverse ensemble of characters, and she just happens to be the one that makes it to the end. Now, like, we know that it's written that way, but it very, very much feels like she just happens to be the one that's left.
Yeah, we were talking about John Carpenter's The Thing earlier, and that doesn't feel like McCready just happens to make it to the end. It seems like he was supposed to.
Yeah.
The Predator movies, it doesn't feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, whose name I can remember, makes it to the end. He's supposed to.
Yeah, they have. But it feels like they have plot
this could have
armor.
been anybody. Yeah, this could have been anybody, and she didn't have plot armor. In retrospect, she has some plot armor, but under initial watchings and until you really think about it, her dying would have been right on point for this movie. You'd be like, oh, everybody's dead. Cool. The other thing is I always need you not to remind people, but I like to always point out, without this movie, we don't get Metroid. We don't get Samus.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Just period. And this is not a particular episode about Metroid and video games in general, but without Metroid, we don't get a lot of other stuff, and then we don't get a lot of other stuff because Metroid got us other stuff. In particular, the Castlevania series on Netflix.
That's true too. Yeah, I think it's amazing how far. Not even talking about the franchise yet, just the movie Alien reaches and pushes into so many other territories. It affects it had a strong effect on the creation of Metroid. Lubus Maximus has a great point, saying without Metroid, you could argue that there wouldn't be a Halo.
Oh, I would argue that without this movie, there's no Halo. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And that's not that's not exactly something that's on the forefront of your mind when you're watching Alien, but like just the reach and the effect the movie has had, I think is important to understand.
No, and it's weird to look at the vision of the later movies and then look at the vision of Halo and go, "Oh yeah, Halo could be Ridley Scott. That's cool."
Mm.
Oh, yes. So Brian's mentioning too. H.R. Geiger's art and the xenomorph. There's a whole bunch of nonsense behind the scenes on that, but at least people have rightfully acknowledged in the industry he designed the xenomorph. That is his baby. He's amazing. Without H.R. Geiger, we don't get the alien looking like it does. It was going to be like a fuzzy werewolf looking thing. It was dumb.
A fuzzy werewolf looking thing. Oof.
Yeah. I do want to talk about some of the scenes in the movie, and I want to hit one in particular.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is a spoiler. If you don't want to hear this, you shouldn't be listening. The chest burster.
Oh, okay. I actually do have a GIF of that. Laying around. It's on the ending stream card, but I believe it's worth bringing up. The chestburster scene.
There we go. There it is on the bottom. Okay, so everything about that scene is real because something happened there when they filmed it that made it real. They test filmed that with the whole crew under a very low PSI. And then when they did it live, they cranked it up. When they got sprayed with the blood and pieces fly everywhere, that was unexpected and seemed like a complete accident, like there was a malfunction. Everybody was actually freaking out when that happened. Sometimes you just get your actors to do the things you need your actors to do. But that scene is so iconic that it appears in so much media, just so much. Like, let's not make a list. Everybody just close your eyes and think about every time you've seen something burst out of something else. That's where it's from. That's it. That's the one.
Definitely.
Is there a scene you want to hit? Because I hit the chest burster, and I think you like the ending
Alien?
a lot. Yeah.
The ending where she blasts the alien out of the cockpit or the shuttle.
Out of the shuttle bay?
Shuttle, right? I really like that. I think the thing for me is, in the end, when she goes to blow up the Nostromo, and she realizes the alien is in front of her path, so she has to go back and then try and shut down or turn back on the cooling system to stop the self-destruct, and then she like misses it by seconds, but like not like so close that it feels wrong, you know what I mean? And then she realizes her only option is to go forward, ends up going forward, thinks she makes it out, and the alien is so it feels like that's the first glimpse of the xenomorph being smart, because it hid and used its body to camouflage itself into the wall, and then it moves, and like I gasp every time, like I like, because I'm like anticipating the move, and then it feels like it happens early. It's scary to me every time. So I guess in particular when it's hiding like that, when you think, oh, she made it, So I think that scene for me was it.
For me, so many movies now do that fake out ending to fake out ending to fake out ending thing, especially in sci-fi, suspense, and horror, that it feels like a trope. But this is the movie that made the trope happen.
Yeah.
Now the elephant in the room, I think. Of course, she fights the monster in her underwear.
Mm-hmm.
It's a male gaze versus female gaze, and I think this movie does a good job of the male gaze not feeling exploitative or creepy. But I think it's because it made sense in the movie, and it wasn't done just to sell tickets, because honestly, at the time, nobody cared who Sigourney Weaver was, so nobody wanted to see her butt. As awful as all of that sounds in retrospect. Yeah. But as a male gaze movie, it did the best job. It's sort of like when you watch Wonder Woman versus any of the other DCEU movies, and Like Wonder Woman, directed by a woman, you can tell, versus Zack Snyder and his jiggle cam, kind of whatever.
Yeah.
Moving on. We had to hit it.
Oh no, definitely, absolutely. And it's something. So when I was introducing my partner Kelly to the movie, when I was doing the rewatch for this, we watched Alien and Aliens together, and it was as soon as it looked like she was safe and she was in her underwear, without even knowing that the alien was coming back, Kelly tuned in on that, and she's like, "Of course she's gonna fight in her underwear. The alien's not gone." And I was just like, "Wow!" It's like it's so because it's not something that I would have actively thought about. It was like right there in front of her to see.
For a full disclaimer, I know that I am not one of these people, and I don't think Dan is either. I'm not gonna excuse everything that happens in every movie because it makes sense in terms of the plot.
Oh no, absolutely.
One, some things don't need to happen, and two, we're gonna get to one of those later. I think we hit Alien. I think I just kind of want to. I want to give my personal review, and then we can talk about Aliens. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
So my personal review for Alien manages to keep me in suspense throughout the whole movie. Though watching it now, you can sometimes feel some tropes. A lot of them started with this movie, and it does some of them the best. Among the top few percent of movies I've seen, this movie is 9 feet underwater in the deep end, 1 foot from perfect. Yeah?
Yeah. So for me, this movie sets an unforgettable tone. It hits all of the existential horrors, the eerie musical composition, the astounding use of practical effects. And then even today, Alien holds up as an iconic suspense horror movie, genre defining. Not only was Ridley Scott able to tell its own story, but he also left a certain openness to make sure that he would revisit in a way that we were going to end up talking about with Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And as well, for me, I would say 9 feet off the deep end with this one.
Very nice. Let's see here.
Should we jump right in on Aliens?
Yeah, so Aliens, in terms of the timeline, takes place in 2179, so that's a bit after Alien.
Yeah, 57 years.
All right, take it away for us, Dan.
Yeah, so after the destruction of the POS Nostromo, we find its only survivors, Ellen Ripley, and of course the cat Jones. Gotta love that. And they are adrift in space. While debriefing with Weyland-Yutani Corp., Ridley discovers that she has been away for 57 years and that a terraforming colony now exists on LV-426. Assured that somehow there have been no signs of a lethal alien creature or a derelict ship that she has described, soon contact is lost with the colony, and Ripley is voluntold to act as a consultant for the squad of colonial marines. After again finding nothing but gore and horror and clearly experiencing a series of gruesome deaths, it is up to Ripley and the remaining Marines to flee with the colony's sole survivor, a young girl named Newt. With the hive of xenomorphs tracking their every move and their queen targeting Ripley, she finds herself in a showdown of a lifetime.
So this is a 1986 film following closely up on the story from Alien. Now directed by James Cameron, this film begins to slide more into the sci-fi action genre, though it is still heavily influenced by its suspense and horror roots. With an estimated budget of $18 million and a worldwide gross of an estimated $180 million, this film, like its predecessor, was an undoubted success. As the 7th highest grossing film of 1986, this multiple Oscar-nominated and multiple Saturn and Hugo Award-winning movie also has the distinction of being Empire Magazine's greatest film sequel of all time. Unlike Alien, Aliens was met with universal praise, and the biggest complaint was it was perhaps too action-oriented, too violent, and too much falling into the tropes of placing a child in danger to increase tension. And honestly, I think those are things this movie managed to embrace and elevate. Let's talk about Aliens now.
Yeah, so I guess I think the first thing that needs to be addressed is the massive tone shift. And you brought it up in your description there.
Mm-hmm.
With the addition Yeah, every critic brought it up because
Yeah.
it's such a departure from the tight and silent suspense horror movie where, you know, we're in was Alien in the 70s, late 70s, and then
Alien
Aliens came.
79.
Okay, 79, and then with this being in the 80s and the action hero movies being at the forefront of what was popular, uh James Cameron took the franchise in that direction with what the rest of the world was enjoying.
Hmm.
And I can say, as a young person, when I first saw these movies, you know, my uncle introduced me with Alien, and then we went to Aliens, and I know when I was young that this was the movie I enjoyed more because it dealt in that sort of rough and tough dudes going at it with huge guns and you know, like doing the action hero thing.
Yeah, and honestly, if I were to really say it, Aliens is probably a more entertaining movie, even though I don't personally feel like it's as good a movie.
I could definitely agree with that.
If there's anything James Cameron can do, he can make a tight sci-fi action movie, perhaps the best ones until you start getting to the late '90s and early 2000s. I'm gonna let you say your piece on this, then I'll say mine. I think this
Okay.
is important.
That okay, so I do we both believe this? Have we confirmed that we both believe this? That the extended edition of the movie is a better movie?
Yes, we do, but I think we get to that conclusion in different ways. Like
Okay.
we disagree to agree.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. So for me,
Okay.
there are a few scenes. So during my rewatch of Aliens, I found myself waiting for a few scenes to happen that never happened, and then I realized that when I grew up with this movie, and praise to my uncle for showing me the extended cut first. Honestly, uh, I grew up with the extended cut, and for me, there were a few scenes missing that I think really pushed the movie towards some of the decisions that were made for it. So the biggest one for me is in the beginning, after Ripley wakes up from her 57 years in cryosleep, she's told that her daughter has died, and they even show like a video of her as an old woman at like what was her like 86th birthday or something, right? And I think that scene really informs her attachment to Newt later on in the movie, like the need to be a parent to Newt and protect Newt. And I think for me at least that makes the movie and that plot point, which is like a main plot point, very strong. And
Yeah.
you know, there are other smaller scenes in the movies where they like spend more time killing aliens, and I think it helped those scenes, particularly with the sentry gun in the hallway and having them come down. I think that helps build out some of the story. Not 100% needed by any means, but it's something I thought added to the pressure of having them get to an escape. You know, they are coming at them, and you see that with a couple of those scenes.
I get to exactly the same conclusion, and for some of the same reasons. But the biggest thing for me is I love movies and I love movie production and all of the background Hollywood businessy things. Um, the best version of this movie is too long for cinemas in the '80s. That said, right now, because of the way Marvel has been doing things, you could get away with releasing what is the director's cut of this movie. You could get away with having the director's cut of this movie released into cinema now. If you had tried to do this in the '80s, people would have rioted essentially. Like, it's too long.
It is
It is
already a long movie for the 80s.
The extended cut is a better movie by a lot, and the extended cut changes what my rating will be later. You'll see. But I understand why it didn't happen, and I understand why later, when you talk about something in particular that I have less experience in, it ruins the canon for that.
Mm.
I get that. The last thing I really always want to talk about for this movie is the power loader fight and the idea that you need to get away from her, you bitch.
Oh, I love that line. This movie is full of good lines, mostly straight from the mouth of Hudson, but but I very personally I think that line right at the end, the "get away from her, you bitch," is like so strong. I love her delivery on it, and just that fight in general is like I know it does because this fight exists in this movie. The movie falls victim to what we were talking about with those false endings. So like Alien being the first one that it does the false ending. Aliens does the false ending like 3 times. So,
but nothing will ever beat Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Fade to black, fade to black, fade to black, fade to black, fade to white. Now the movie's over. There we go. Oh man, the end of that movie is longer than some movies, especially if you watch the extended cut of that. In any case, power loader fight. Without the power loader fight, we don't get the excellent 1990s cartoon Exo Squad. And if you haven't watched Exo Squad from beginning to end yet, just go do that.
Oh, that's on the list now. That's on the list.
The power loader fight also gets us a lot of other exoskeleton scenes that aren't Iron Man. Later down the road, like somebody in like a human-sized, bigger than human robot vehicle thing fighting stuff. I know when we had pre-discussed this, you had talked about
but I think I said Pacific Rim. I know I know kaiju movies obviously existed before Aliens did. And it may be like Aliens like picking that trope out of a hat and like hitting on that. But like it doesn't even necessarily, we don't need to necessarily say Aliens did this and other movies are doing this. It's a big trope to hit, you know.
And it's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's a fun one. The Godzilla movies have done it. Like the Pacific Rim movies done it. Aliens includes it. You know, there are a million examples.
I just like that this is taking farm equipment or industrial equipment and using it to win in the end. And what is it? Bumblebee does that at the end, which is pretty good. It also happens in one of the other Transformers movies. The crop duster thing in Independence Day, in the extended scenes that nobody cares about. All of that. Like taking something mundane and defeating the actual horror allows you to self-insert because, I don't know, we all have access to a riding lawnmower. We could use that to defeat aliens, right? That's what this movie says. It says it right there.
Yeah. in not so many words.
Why don't you do your
me first? All right. When I first saw this movie, I was 15. My uncle showed me these movies in order, and I definitely enjoyed Aliens more. Going back and rewatching it this time for the purpose of this podcast, I still find myself holding Aliens close and having a firm place in my heart just out of nostalgia. It's still a very strong movie, especially in this franchise. But as an adult, I don't see it as a cohesive answer to the questions that were left in Alien, but more of a simple continuation of Ripley's story. And that is definitely not an insult to the story they tell. For me, 8 feet off the deep end.
And for me personally, I don't go as far as calling this a perfect sequel. And there are things that the director's cut improves so much that judging the theatrical and the most common release feels incomplete. As a genre-defining sci-fi action movie, it stands shoulder to shoulder with The Terminator and The Matrix. Though the theatrical release is further from perfect than Alien, this is a solid 7.5 feet deep. Though the completionist in me would be remiss not to mention that the director's cut and the deleted scenes would have made this a solid 8.5 or 9 feet deep.
All right. We're moving on to everyone's favorite in the franchise.
You say that so derisively, and we're moving into where my opinions become incredibly unpopular, likely. Alien 3, which takes place just somewhere about 2179.
Yeah, so this is same year, technically. This is something I didn't know, and when we did a little research for this podcast, just like reviewing the timeline, Alien 3 happens the same year Aliens happens.
It feels to me like it should be happening 50 years down the line or something, but like...
At least 10. Whatever. At least 10. But yes.
Especially considering the fact that this movie is 6 years later in terms of release time. But give us the back of the box.
Sure. So, as luck would have it, after narrowly escaping LV-426 with Hicks and Newt, Ripley's escape vessel experiences a fire and a crash. This time, she comes face to face again with the xenomorphs on a nearly empty prison planet, Fury 161. Ripley, now the sole survivor of 2 xenomorph encounters, must face a slightly different version of the xenomorph, spawned inside man's best friend. One single tear for that dog. Watch as she considers various personal sacrifices while avoiding somehow plot-relevant sexual assault. Come see a great Come see a great movie studio butchered into a terrible one that somehow doesn't involve the wooden spaceship Wu-Tang Clan from the original script.
Before I go into what is the stuff about the actual release and production of this movie, one of the original scripts for this movie, of the thousands or millions, billions, infinite original scripts of this movie, involved a wooden spaceship filled with warrior space monks that somehow... Wooden spaceship filled with warrior space monks. That's all I need to say.
No, you had to stop and back yourself up. You said wooden spaceship continued, and then you were like, wait, let me emphasize on the wooden spaceship aspect of this plot detail.
We don't even need any more of it. It was the wooden spaceship Wu-Tang Clan. Period. Yeah. That's what it was. The troubled production all around. It was troubled. 1992's Alien 3 is a strange beast. Outside of the Alien franchise, this would have been an excellent movie. But within the context of the franchise, it falls flat. Studio interference, production hell, script changes, rewrites, changing the writers, changing the directors. The troubles of this movie could be explored in detail at length and could just blossom. But concentrating on the movie as we consume it now, on a budget of $50 million, this movie underperformed in North America with a roughly $75 million box office, though it did over $170 million worldwide. Not a success, but pulling it out of the flop territory. The special effects, for the time, were among the top tier, though greatly outshined by their contemporaneous movies like Jurassic Park, Terminator 2. The effects have aged much less well than those groundbreaking films. This film, like the previous in the series, was nominated for a handful of awards, including an Oscar for visual effects, though it was nominated for far fewer awards, major awards, and won none. Neither a critical darling, a box office flop, or poorly reviewed movie in general. This movie, viewed within the Alien franchise, is middling, though entertaining. And I know you have a lot of things you want to attack about that, Dan, so...
Oh, no. It's less of an attack and more of a... I'm, like, still questioning where the love comes from, but let's actually...
For me, this movie's nostalgia. This is one of the first movies I ever rode my bike to the theater and saw.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so for me, it's nostalgia city.
Yeah. So let's hit on the visual effects, because
yeah, let's do that.
So upon rewatch, and I actually didn't know until you just said that this movie was nominated for an Oscar for visual effects, which is like absolutely astounding, because looking at the visual effects in this movie, you go back and watch Aliens, and you go back even further and watch Alien, and you're like, why did they choose to use these the way they did? And for me, the way you worded it is perfectly, I think perfectly sums up my point, is that Jurassic Park and Terminator, same age of visual effects, and they've aged much, much better than Alien 3, and I think it's all in how they chose to show and use it.
Yes. I think that if anyone here really wants to learn more about possibly how they use this wrong, there's a great YouTube channel. It's Corridor Crew. They're going to talk about strong edge lighting and the pores stretch. Basically, this movie was as good as it could get, unless you were groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
But that meant it was also still so early that nobody really realized what to do. Me and Dan had a giant discussion about this in general.
But yeah, I think even recognizing now that the CG effects were great at the time and didn't age well, I think it really just comes down to how they decided to blend practical and CG, and where they decided to use those shots, and how they decided to frame those shots. And I mean, there are great practical effects in Alien 3, and I know that I have a GIF somewhere on one of these title cards here of the alien coming face to face with a bald cut Ripley, and like get like right up in her grill, and that alien looks fantastic. But that's a practical effect alien.
We need to talk about that scene right now.
Sure. I think that's the best scene in the movie, honestly.
It is. Maybe the second for me.
Okay.
But the thing about that scene is, spoilers, the thing about that scene is that she's clearly carrying, at that point, she's carrying the queen in her. And it comes and sniffs her and breathes and does that little extra mouth thing, like when a cat chitters at a squirrel, and then it just leaves. And you're like, oh,
yeah,
how does she feel? What's even going on? Like, face to face with like what has been haunting you for, at this point, hundreds of years, like, or 100 years. Like, I know some of it she was in cryosleep, but like, she has had more experience with this alien, basically, in terms of intense experiences than she did with her own daughter. And like,
yeah, basically all of her life up until this point, like at least half of her life is like hardcore alien guttural experiences now,
Yeah.
And like how unnerving to be like sitting there on the floor being like, well, this is finally it, even, and then having it go away. And then at that point, does she know in the movie? She like goes and scans herself after, right?
Was it after, or was it?
I'm not sure.
Oh, honestly, at that point, she knew.
Yeah. Oh, like, that confirmed it. And another thing, particularly about that scene, also showed off just a little bit more of the xenomorph being somewhat intelligent. Like it's tough to see them as intelligent creatures, or something as intelligent as a dog, maybe, or even smarter. And I don't think you really see that until the next movie, and we'll definitely talk about that scene that I'm thinking of.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
But I think that added layer there is cool.
Yeah.
You said there was another scene?
So I had named the wrong director earlier. The director is David Fincher, by the way, when we talked about it in our pre-talk. This is very clearly a David Fincher movie. Let's just throw that out there. This is a David Fincher movie. It has that dark nihilism. It has that sort of, everything is like cranked up real and gritty. In the opening, we talked about plot-relevant sexual assault. They're a weird cult who decided to stay on their prison planet until they die for reasons that are vaguely explained. But let's be real, they're a prison colony planet. They're relatively murdery and rapey. And she's the only woman who's appeared for most of them in forever. David Fincher, just like, 7,
yeah.
Cool, awesome, like, great, but head in a box, cool, awesome. Just like, crank it back, dude. Just like a smidge, maybe? Especially if it's about aliens, not like a serial killer. Oh, I do want to talk about my other favorite scene.
Oh, let's do that.
So the alien is just wrecking house, and they get everybody into the cafeteria, essentially, and they're having their giant talk about, like, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna get the fire axes, and blah 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 blah. And they totally ripped this off for Deep Blue Sea, and I didn't realize. And the speech is happening and all this, and then the alien comes out of the ceiling and grabs the guy giving the speech and right out of there, and everybody's like, oh yeah, F this. No, we're done. We're gonna try and throw this thing into the metal, and if we all die, that's cool, because that's fucking terrifying. Let's, like, no. But the speech itself, that whole scene really has this, like, everybody would get that almost jingoistic sort of, we're gonna do this, and then when something that horrible happens, everyone would go, we're all gonna die. Awesome. And it's perfect.
Yeah.
And Deep Blue Sea does it really well, but it's very clearly this scene with some kind of underwater super intelligent shark. Anyway,
we don't need to analyze the plot details of Deep Blue Sea.
Dude, the shark can swim backwards. Anyway, my review of Alien 3. Unpopular opinions incoming. Because of the lens of nostalgia through which I view this movie, I have a hard time saying bad things about it. And like Aliens, this movie had an incredible director, and an incredible director's cut. In this case, it's called the assembly cut. Go watch that. It's amazing. Some of it's janky because it's like right off the cutting room floor. This is not a great movie. It has scenes which are grim, too grim and too real for entertaining fiction. But there is something about it. Its criminess, its weird cult of prisoners, sexual assault aside, and the aesthetic, which feels so 90s, so grunge nihilistic that it hurts. Do you need to see it? No. But you should. For me, the theatrical release is 6 feet deep, though a foot of that is nostalgia. The assembly cut is 7 feet deep, nostalgia not included. And I also hate that we have to keep hitting the sexual assault part of that, but like I don't want to send somebody into this movie and then they're like, "Why did you send me to watch this movie where awfulness happens?" But like,
yeah, no, it's there, it's bad, it's
unnecessary, and it's very 90s. There's a ton of 90s movies that are based upon this Sliver. Sliver's about like a guy who owns an apartment building who like just spies on his neighbors and then does terrible things to them. By manipulating them, it's awful. But like, people were like, "It's the greatest movie ever." It's awful. It's awful. It's awful.
It's awful.
So is parts of this, and you could cut them out, and it would still be a fine movie.
Oh yeah, if you took that scene out of the movie, I think it'd be a better movie for it.
I think it's a reason for her. I'm not defending it. It's a reason for her to kick those guys' asses, and to introduce Charles S. Dutton as a secondary hero. They could have done that in a million other ways. If it was just, I would have preferred them being cannibals. Period.
Cannibals would have felt a little better.
Like the only fresh meat they get is rats and this person now. Like that.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't know. It just feels icky now.
For sure. So for me, Alien 3 falls short in a lot of different ways, and I think we touched on a lot of them, but I do believe that there could have possibly been a good movie somewhere in Alien 3, and there are definitely moments of that peek through. If I had to credit the movie with a winning moment, it's definitely the Xeno sniffing Ripley and then leaving her because it knows that she's mothering an alien queen. But overall, it's 4 feet off in the deep end. It's not highly regarded over in the Dilling camp.
I will say one thing. The last 10 minutes of this movie, after what's left of Weyland Yutani kind of shows up, or when I'm not going to spoil this, the last 10 minutes of this movie are actually fantastic. They're from a much better movie.
There are parts from a much better movie.
Yes, and the ending
is one of them. Unfortunately, it's still a 2-hour movie, and if 10 minutes of it is from a good movie, then I give you a pity clap.
Check out the next episode of Media Genius Podcast presents The Deep Dive for the rest of the Alien franchise. Once again, thanks for coming.